Gear up as Cash Miller and the team of accomplished guests steer you on an enlightening voyage filled with valuable tips, fresh insights, and effective strategies. Welcome to Marketing Masters, the Agency Power Show.
Hello, everyone. This is Cash Miller. I'm the host of Marketing Masters and the CEO of Titan Digital. I've got with me today Cat Valyi, CV, Strategic Marketing Solutions. We're going to be talking healthcare marketing and somewhat, there's like a lot of differences between healthcare and what we can do with other types of businesses. And I think it's really important, there are agencies out there are people out there that focus on being able to market, healthcare type businesses, but there's a lot of restrictions. There's a lot of things that we can't, you can't do in that realm that you can do in others. And, it's good to be aware of the differences and stuff. Kat, it's great to have you. Can you tell us a little bit about, yourself and, you're a consultant, you operate as a CMO, so give us the rundown.
Awesome. Great to be here. Thank you for having me. My name is, again, Cat Valyi. I am the CEO of CV, Strategic Marketing Solutions. I'm also the co-founder of OM Growth Solutions, OM Growth Systems, and Women with Dynamic Purpose. And I have over 30 years in the healthcare B2B space, 28 of those as in the corporate space and 9 as an entrepreneur. I help leaders in the healthcare B2B space change their marketing mindset and develop a winning strategies to help them get, keep, and grow their clients. I use my 3D strategic marketing approach to help them define, design, and deploy their strategies. And healthcare is an interesting place to be, but I love that space for several reasons, but that's about me.
Well, healthcare marketing is typically, it's patience. It's being out in front of people, getting patients and stuff. Is that an area that you typically, so when you're working with clients, what is your primary focus in the healthcare space?
Well, the interesting thing about healthcare, I work in the B2B space, so I work business to business. But ultimately, anytime you're working in healthcare, the ultimate client, if you follow it all the way through, is the patient, right? So you always have to be thinking about it that way. There's a lot of regulations. There's a lot of interesting things about access to data, how quickly you can get data to individuals, but there's the security aspect. So it's thinking about how you're going to communicate that information, but always keeping that there's a patient all the way at the end of the line. Okay,
so in this space, there's a lot of restrictions. There's a lot of things. There's many of the different aspects to healthcare marketing to what you can do with other types of businesses. And a lot of similarities, like marketing in general can be very open, but there are certain industries, healthcare being one of them. Others that come to mind are, guns and, certain like tobacco products, things like that are very restricted. What are some of the, restrictions? Let's start there so people understand how marketing in the healthcare space is limited.
Well, there's 2 aspects. Number one, when you're thinking about medical devices, anything that goes inside the body, you have to really consider the FDA and what you can say. You can't say things like it's the best in the world unless it's the best in the world and you have proof. You have physical proof. So there's a lot of data, especially if you're in the medical device space. You have to be very careful of how much emphasis you put on things unless you have data behind every single point. So when you're marketing, you're trying to be exciting, but you can't be too excited about what you're saying unless you have the data. With regard to the technology services and solution side, it's less of that FDA component, but it's more about the compliance and understanding HIPAA, understanding state regulations versus federal. It's understanding how the patient will ultimately understand what you're saying versus what the executives in the hospital, want. So it's really just understanding how to take that information and articulate it in a way that's meaningful, because when you're working with an organization, you're working with the compliance folks are very comfortable when they speak to a marketer that understands all these components. How do they get paid? How do where does the insurance company play? How do you talk about that? How do you talk about the regulations and making sure you're not violating any one of the regulations that are out there? And then when you're working with the sales team, you're providing enough data so it's not just milk toast. It's not like, oh, this is a great solution, because they need to talk a little bit more in depth. So you want to provide that information that really kind of touches on what's important to the buyer and the decision makers at that organization.
Let me ask you, okay, so you hit on something that I had not personally thought about much in the case, and we've dealt with some, healthcare type organizations anyway that have some concerns, but you mentioned federal versus state regulations. Is there a lot of difference, when, come the different states that you have to take into account? Because if you have an organization that's working cross state, you have to consider, both states, being different. Do you see a lot of that kind of stuff, or do you know of a lot of differences?
Yeah, well, the difference is, especially if you're talking about HIPAA and compliance related things, that's when it's important for the sales, right? Because when the sales folks, when you're marketing statewide, you're more talking federal. But when you start talking to one-on-one to a particular state, you want to make sure that the data and the information that you're providing to that salesperson, and they're talking to somebody in Alabama versus somebody in California, they don't sound like they don't know what they're doing because you're just giving them things, you know what I mean? So that's when you want to have, it's almost like you have a deck of information, or you have access to information, so you can allow and provide that information that makes sense to that particular buyer. So it's when you start talking and having the conversation. So when marketing kind of passes it over to sales, once they've help with the know, like, and trust, getting the, clients closer and so on and so forth. Then when you're helping sales with that content, that's when you've got to know.
So your consideration is, like we've worked in some different, niche industries and stuff, specific segments and whatnot. Insurance is an area that we've done a lot of work with over the years, independent agencies, and you have to know the speak really to kind of be accepted by. So what you're saying is you may know healthcare, but you need to know healthcare in Alabama. Yeah. And that's kind of where your regulations can come in and things like that, because you're going to have differences versus if you're in California, and the people you're dealing with would know the difference.
Right. And, many times it's not 100% of the time, but it's helpful. It kind of gives you that leg up. If you're speaking and those little nuances, then that organization will say, okay, they know where we are. They understand. And as a marketer, if you're diving into that and you're really learning about that and you take that extra step, and especially if you've been in that space a long time, it's easier to kind of hit the ground running and help an organization.
Let's talk about the compliance a bit more, but as if you're a healthcare organization, and you're intending to do marketing online, or is there an approval process that you have to go through? I think of, you get pharmacy ads, or the big pharma ads, for different drugs and stuff. And then if you look at the digital ad, it's got all of just like if you hear it on TV, right? Mm-hmm. Maybe this, by the time you've heard everything, you're like, I don't want to touch that drug. Because of all the side, complications, potential side effects and stuff. But they have to do that in digital ads and stuff too, from a marketing standpoint. Is there how do you end up in compliance? Like, you do these things, but is somebody checking them, or are they how is it, working on that end? Or is it just, hey, we're self-governing, we know we have to do this, so let's go ahead and do it?
Well, that's why you have your internal compliance folks, right? That's when I was saying that compliance folks within an organization, they're more comfortable when the head of marketing understands, what they're talking about. So this way they'll avoid the minefields. You want to be able to connect with your compliance folks. So this way you are saying, make sure you're not saying this, or make sure you're, and it's an internal.
Okay.
But that's where the connection is. And that's where you want to make sure that you're on the same page, because it's almost like self-governing. And if nothing happens, okay, great. But if something happens, then your reputation is on the line. Then you're doing all of this other work on trying to fix the mistakes. And then people start to think about you differently. And maybe if it's bad enough, maybe there are fines associated with it. Then we're talking revenue. So it's internal for each organization. They should have a compliance person that truly understands compliance, and it's not like a side job, because the negative aspects are quite large.
So they govern themselves. The organizations, they'll know how they can, sort of the boundaries they can push and things like that, but when it comes to marketing is all about building trust, with your audience and everything. But it seems like it's more of a challenge from a healthcare perspective, because again, it's like I say, you watch the ad and then you hear all the side effects, and it's like, why would I want to try that? So how do you end up building trust when at the same time you have to tell all of these negatives to be, transparent about it? That would, because that goes against building trust. I'm going to tell you everything that is wrong with this drug. Now, it could be that 1 out of 1,000 people had any problem. I know that there's like right now they're having an issue. The weight loss drugs that have come out. There's 2 of them. I don't remember the names, but apparently they're extremely effective, except that a few people have had intestinal issues, that have come up, and that part's also become very public now because of it. So, and one of them, I think, just sued one of the drug companies, over it. The drug itself actually has worked for a ton of people, though. It's, the small number of people that have had negative side effects, I mean, it's very minimal if you think about it. It's just, but because of the popularity of that drug, it's become, it's very noticeable when something goes wrong, because people are going to say something.
Yeah. The interesting thing about that, now, I don't work as much in the pharmaceutical area, but the interesting thing about that drug is that it's really for another reason. It just happens to have a side effect that
it's a diabetic drug,
right? And so people are using it, and I don't know how that's going to work out for the physicians unless the person is diabetic, or people using it that are not diabetic, and so on. So well, in the case of that particular one, yes, it came out as a diabetic drug, but what they're finding is they've been doing test groups and stuff on weight loss specific, because it's been extreme. It's been very noticeable that it does a lot of work for you over, the course of a year and stuff. So now they're testing to see if they can get approval that way, and it is being kind of recommended as a side benefit at the moment. Yeah, there was a drug I would say about 20 years ago, that I swear all my neighbors were using. That was fen or fen something.
Oh, I remember,
really, and people were losing weight like crazy. And then suddenly, it's like the more people started to use it, the population grew, and then you can see more negative effects. But with regards to those kind of ads with all those negative kind of, they're telling you the truth of all the side effects. People have been desensitized over the years, because this started because drug companies could not advertise for and it was only about, I want to say 15, 20 years ago, maybe, that they started to really advertise, because before they weren't, but they had to list all of these things. But people start to get desensitized, and then they look at the commercial. That's why these commercials are so visual, and they have so many happy people, and they have
as a counter.
They're telling a story that outweighs the negatives, and everybody is starting to understand that the percentage of something happening. And then it becomes, do I want to look wonderful? Do I want to feel wonderful? Maybe I'm not that person this is going to happen.
Yeah.
And then that quick list of negatives, it's like, okay, it's there, but we see that on everything.
Yeah.
People have really become, I believe, desensitized about that list, and sometimes you hear if you're listening and you hear it's like your leg falls off or your whatever, but the pain, the outcome is greater than the pain in the mind of the individual. And so they go for that. And really all they're doing, these companies, are trying to create a brand. So this way, when someone goes to the physician's office, because in the past, a patient would go to a physician's office and say, I have this problem, give me a thing. We didn't know what the thing was. Now we're saying, give me Ozempic, give me this thing. We're naming the thing. And then the doctor then says, yes, no, or I'm going to give you this other one, whoever he has the contract with or whatever. So what these ads are doing, even though they're talking about 1,000 negative things, they're turning us into people that are asking for the thing, which changes the conversation.
That's really insightful, honestly, because it's like you've got we are getting to know the brand names, so they are doing a ton of brand awareness for the drug itself. I couldn't tell you which drug company made it, but they're focused on the names of the the drugs, and then and you're right that they desensitize you to all these negatives because you're watching. I just keep thinking that there's this one where this lady is literally dancing, and then everybody else is dancing, and the mailman comes up and he's singing, and you can tell it's not the guy, actual dude, but everybody looks so happy, about how their life is so much better on this drug, and so you become desensitized, and actually, even though you can. If you're paying attention to what they're saying, you can hear it going on in the background. At the same time, they're singing, and stuff. And, everybody, so they're almost distracting you from the negatives because we've got all of this positive energy, essentially, on the other end. So
and when people are in pain or people are discomfort, they want to see a better outcome. And this is what they're showing them. You could feel better. You could, and they have to list. And really those percentages are usually very, very low. It could just be one person that had that effect. They have to put it there, so.
Yeah, that's a good point too. Yeah, so it's as low as a single person has this happen to them, and they can attribute it to the drug. Then they have to disclose that the possibility at least exists, but the percentage is actually could be really minuscule. Yeah, it's interesting. In the case of because you deal a lot in or have dealt with medical devices and things like that. Okay, so how do you go? Because you're kind of looking at two ways of marketing with that, right? For one, you've got people that, would buy medical devices, certain things directly, but you deal with a lot of selling them to organizations and stuff. Is that right?
Well, the medical devices would go directly to the hospitals, right? So if you're if you're a medical device company, you're selling normally directly to a, healthcare organization. And the work that has to be done has to happen before you start marketing, right? So all of when I was a product manager in that space, you had to make sure that your medical device, did no harm, that it made sure that the colors or if there were anything on, it had to go through all these regulatory processes. And then you had to submit it to the FDA. And once they said yes, they gave you this very limited way of talking about it. Then the compliance department within the organization would give that information to the marketing people. And suddenly you have to try to market it based only on these things that the FDA and the compliance department have outlined. And that's where the tricky part is. How do you differentiate yourself from the competition if you can only say certain things? So that's where you really start digging into what's important to the prospect and kind of talk to them emotionally, right? You want to talk to them about those things. You can't just say, this is the best laryngoscope in the world, right? But you can talk about the physical attributes that make it better than maybe somebody else.
Huh. So you have like all these, you have limitations on, you can't go saying you're the best, really. You can't say any, so you have to, it's an interesting thing because it's a very nuanced way of doing marketing. I have to figure out, I think it's the best, but I've got to really say how it's the best without actually using the word best.
Right.
I need to find those points that differentiate it. So I would almost want to buy my competitors' products in a sense, a sample. So I have different, and I can put myself as a comparison so that I can understand the differences as a marketer. Then I know where my points of emphasis can be, for my audience.
Yeah, and that's one level. The other level is that's where your brand becomes a differentiator, right? Because you want to say, if you focus on your brand and the exceptionalism of the products you're putting forward, then people tend to trust, oh, this brand here, they're going to always put out good quality. And Dr. So-and-so uses this. And that's when recommendations and getting folks to talk about your product from their perspective is so important. When you can get someone to do a testimonial about your solution, that's so important in healthcare because they listen to each other more than they listen to you.
So if I can't use the word, I can't really say, it's the best product or anything, but I could go based on what you're saying is I could say something like trusted by, so many, trusted by over 100 organizations nationwide or something like that, it could, because that I can prove.
Yes.
I could just, if somebody questioned it, I can show you my customer list and say, these people buy this.
Exactly.
That's interesting. And I get your point of testimonials. The first thing though that comes to mind, just in saying that is I see those the ads that have, they always put some physician, dentists or something, in the ad that's saying, hey, I recommend this. I always wonder if they're actual, real doctors that they
if you look closer under the picture, they always have to disclose if they are in fact. Sometimes you'll see actor representation and it's very small, or it says actual client or so on. But you have to disclose that on the ad and it's there. And the trick is to talk about it in terms of, and that's the trick. You don't want to just say, oh, it's the best. It's great.
Right.
I use it. It's why is it, and it's usually what's important to that organization, right? It makes my patients happier. It makes my patients trust me more. It brings me more revenue. It reduces the stress from my day-to-day staff. It's really kind of honing in and tapping into what's important to that particular buyer. I'm a big believer of the Maslow's hierarchy of need and understanding the different levels and what's important to that target audience. And you really need to talk to these folks and understand not only what the product solution service gives you, but what are the after effects? What pain does it avoid and what benefits that's important to that particular individual? What does it bring forward? And that's the thing. Those are the things that make the conversation a little more compelling.
How do you go about getting that? There's a lot of reach out, I would assume, to be able to get essentially those testimonials, to find those, things of why they like the product, why is it better, than others, so to get that, that information, you have to go through a lot of, reach out to be able to deal with it, to get what you need, right?
Yeah, certainly. One of the things I am a big believer that marketing needs to be part of is advisory groups within your organization. And even as part of the onboarding process, like let's say if you're bringing on new clients and what's that process. Marketing should be involved in that, because then we can tap into and find those clients, working with customer service, operations, and so on, those clients that are most satisfied with the product. Also, if you create an advisory group and it's either led by marketing or marketing is one of the key leaders of that group, then you're able to ask the questions to kind of see, oh, this client actually uses the product and is happy because of something different than other people are. So it's just really, so it is outreach, but you've got to make it an active thing beforehand. You don't want to wait till you're ready, to get recommendations or testimonials. This is something that has to be put on the front end as the whole part of the process. So this way you're saying, we're going to get this client in. This client is a super user of our solution. They're very engaged. We're engaging with them. Let's get them on the advisory group. Let's do surveys. Let's go on site and see how they use the product, see how other people, so it's not a small task, but it's got great benefits.
Yeah, I can definitely see that. And you can kind of go through your customer list to figure out, based on orders and stuff, who are your super users essentially, to see who, you want to kind of be able to dive in deeper with things, put them on an advisory group and such, because they become actual true advocates, because, I say if they're selling anything more already, then they've probably already figured out really the maximum amount of uses or whatnot, whatever that product may have, the full benefits of it, I guess. Yeah. And so those are the ones that are going to make the most sense for everything you're doing, whether it's a group, testimonial, video, stuff like this, because it's also going to come off as, more authentic, too, with those people, because they're true believers in the benefits.
Yes, absolutely.
In the case of ROI, let's talk that for a minute, because how, with the different areas of healthcare marketing, how are you measuring everything? I mean, the obvious one is like patients and stuff. And, if you're on that ultimate end user, did we this year bring in more people than we did, and I hate to say it, like, I think of hospitals, I'm like, that seems horrible, because we don't, a hospital wants more patients, but as a society, we should want to be in there less, but how do you measure it, for like different segments?
Well, if we're talking about B2B organizations, many times it has to do with ultimately growth, right? But one of the best things I start with is, where are we today and where are we tomorrow, right? So when you start a marketing project, program, whatever, the most important thing to do is, or one of the most important things to do, is to get where you are today. How many leads are coming in? What's the brand awareness of your product? How many people are using it, or what's what are people saying about it? So you have to almost immediately get that information. So this way you can then talk to the leadership and say, what do we want to do? What do we want from our marketing? What kind of growth do we want? Do we want more brand awareness? Do we want more leads to go to sales? Do we want more people to click our website and sign up directly? But if you don't know where you started and you just start and begin, then you start looking at the numbers. You don't know what your growth was. You don't know what your percentage is. And then you lay down that information. You identify what your KPIs, your key performance indicators are, and then you can track them, and you do whatever the strategy, and then put the plans in place to achieve those things. So it's hard to say an exact number, but because it always starts with where you began, and then you.
Well, it puts the importance on benchmarking everything, when you first start a campaign, which is general marketing rules. You should be benchmarking, where you are today, so that you can see the growth and you'll be able to see it over time. And then you have to figure out at the same time, you want your KPIs so that you have, what metrics are we going to track, so that we understand where the growth matters to us.
Yeah. And we have to be honest with ourselves too, because how long does it take for someone to make a decision on your product, right? If you're selling a widget, like when I was in medical devices, I would sell, let's say, no scalpel vasectomy sets, right? I could sell that to urologists, and I could do a promotion where I knew that I could do buy two, get one, and in a month, I can have an increase in sales, and I can see that right away because that's a very small buyer, and the amount of money was was within that particular buyer's ability to make a quick decision. When you're talking about technology that's going into an organization that will affect the whole organization, that a lot of people have to make decisions on it, you have to be honest about the buyer's journey and the cycle. How long does it take? Does it take 3 months, 6 months, 10 months, a year? Is it part of an RFP? Those are the things you have to be also aware of. So you can have marketing, but really maybe the marketing is just to get people to know, like, and trust you, to get closer enough. So this way you can get it into sales hands, and then sales has to do their whole process, which may take months in order to close the deal. So that's the important part too, really being honest with yourself.
Yeah, having realistic expectations, but also understand the journey and know that different products, different services you sell could be a different cycle. And so, some of your payoff might be further, as an agency owner, we deal with RFPs occasionally too. And the cycle can be months versus something that comes direct to us. We're not competing necessarily. There wasn't a request, put out for a proposal. Somebody came and said, hey, can you do this for us? And then we negotiated over it. So your sales cycle can be much, much shorter in those instances versus something where, somebody wanted a proposal and you're stacked up against how many companies you don't know.
Yeah, in healthcare, RFPs can be a big factor. So then marketing's role is to make sure, two things. Number one, you've got to make sure you're on the list for an RFP, but also, if not, you've got to work on the brand. So when they're doing the RFP, they're thinking about you. Oh, we got to get so-and-so organization on this list. And so that becomes part of the thought process. So it's understanding how those folks buy. That is an extremely important aspect of the whole marketing in the healthcare space.
Yeah. Okay. Well, this has been like a fascinating discussion. Cat, how would people get a hold of you when they need a fractional CMO and a healthcare marketing expert?
Well, you can go to my website and at www.cvstrategicmarketing.com, or you can connect with me on LinkedIn. Look for Cat Valyi. I'm telling you, I'm the only one. You can find me there. Let's connect, and you can DM me and we can chat.
That's great. So I'm the host of Marketing Masters, Cash Miller, and I'm also the CEO of Titan Digital. It's been another great episode. We've been talking healthcare marketing. It's something that not everybody, totally understands. There's a lot of, ins and outs that go to it. So it's been a great discussion, and glad you could join us.